Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Stump the DPE. I'm your host, Jim Pittman. And back with us, we've got Carl Hancock. Welcome back, Carl. Say hi.
Hey guys, yeah, happy to be here. It's exciting to be back. Been really busy with taking care of all of my 4 children during this special time.
No worries. Definitely understandable. I'm glad you got your priorities straight, but we're glad you're able to break away and spend a little time with us. If you haven't yet, check out Carl online. Fly with the Guys is his channel.
Yep.
Where you find your social media. So love the new background there, Carl. Looking good. Also
Yep.
with us today, we've got Joe Stanley from it's mypilotprogress.com. Check that out if you have not yet. Is there anything else, Joe, that would be good to share as far as social media or anything for you?
I just have my regular website page for pilot flight training courses, and I also have flightinstructorjoe.com, which is related to the flight instructor site for pilots and student pilots on Facebook.
Perfect. Well, appreciate you being here. So this is kind of unusual. We actually just have the three of us so far, which is okay. The show must go on. We had about a half a dozen people that registered to join us, but I don't know. Maybe this is a sign that people are actually getting back to work. That'd be a good problem to have.
Actually, we just had someone join us.
Hey, very good. So Pico made it. Welcome, Pico. If you've got a question, go ahead and click the chat box, and you can type in there in the chat box. Let Carl know that you have a question. He'll keep an eye on that. But for starters, I thought this would be a good opportunity. Actually, it was Carl's suggestion. Thank you, Carl. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about the ACS, and something that most people probably think they know a lot about, but it's worth making some emphasis points on. So let me share my desktop here, and I'm just going to open up. That's working. So let's just start with private pilot. Doesn't really matter. They're all very similar design. So I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about this and some of the things that I think get overlooked a lot. So the ACS is the Airman Certification Standards. And for anyone doing basic training in the United States, or even if you're doing it abroad, but it's going to be an FAA Checkride, you're going to be looking at the ACS. These are the standards set by the FAA that govern basically how good you have to fly, how much you have to know, what you need to do to qualify and pass the practical test, which is known as the Checkride. And one of the things that gets overlooked a lot is the value of the content that they put at the back of the document. So in fact, I can just open the bookmarks here. You can see in the PDF, they have all the different sections. And down at the very end is an appendix, or the table of contents for the appendices. And you can see here that there are 10 different appendices, and there's a lot of really good information in here. So a lot of times the appendix gets overlooked, but here's about 25 pages that you definitely want to go over. You should know whether you're training in a Part 61 school or a Part 141 school. I shouldn't say Part 61 school. It would be a flight instructor signing you off operating under Part 61, and then an approved school would be Part 141. But if you're training under Part 61, there will be a few paragraphs in here, maybe a few pages that talk about Part 141. You can kind of skim past that. But it's still good information to kind of file in the back of your head to know where it's at. So that's my first big suggestion, is to go through and read everything that is there in the appendices. More specifically, under Appendix 5, if I click on that, it's actually just a hot link. I really want to emphasize what they have here for responsibilities. There's the applicant responsibility, the instructor, and the evaluator responsibilities. There's some important definitions in there as well. And this is good for managing expectations. Another thing that's important to understand is right here, page, well, here in the private one, it's Alpha 8, is what has to be covered on the ground portion of the practical test, or the oral portion of your check ride, however you want to say it. And that is at least one knowledge element, at least one risk management element, and all skill elements. So what that means is when we go up to the beginning of this document and we get down to some of the meat and potatoes of the areas of operation. So here's area of operation 1, task A, pilot qualifications, and there's the objective of that task, the knowledge section, the risk management, and the skill section. The part we were just looking at in the appendix says that the evaluator must go over at least one knowledge item or task, element is the proper name for that. And I'm getting a little bit of background noise. Carl, if you can check who's unmuted, thank you. So at least one element from knowledge, one from risk management, and then all skill elements. So that tells you right there that, well, first of all, pay special attention to the skill elements, because when the evaluator is doing their job, they are going to cover all of those. None of those will be a surprise, but you need to be prepared to go over all of the knowledge items and all the risk management items. The evaluator will create a plan of action specific for your Checkride, and he or she will choose which knowledge items and which risk management items they want to go over. So you won't know until it happens, and they could go over more than one per task. But the minimum is that they do at least one knowledge, one risk management. And before I forget, need to mention all areas or topics that were missed on your written test. So when you go back and look at the items or the subject codes that were missed on your FAA written test, if you got anything less than 100%, you're going to have one or more codes there, and the evaluator is required to go over all of those topics as well. Those could count in lieu of something that was already in their plan of action, but they need to at least do that. So as the applicant getting ready for the Checkride, I would say, again, go read all the appendices and get familiar with the information that's there, and then start here on area of operation 1, task A, and go through everything line by line, making sure that you're comfortable with the material. The reference documents here at the top, these are official FAA codes for things like the Airplane Flying Handbook, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, things like that. Advisory circulars would be AC. You can just copy and paste those codes into Google, and the document you're looking for will come right up. So check the official references for anything that you want to learn more about. And look for words or acronyms or things that you don't recognize. I had an applicant once, I remember I started asking them questions related to CFIT, CFIT. So if we go Control F here in the PDF on Windows is to find, and I type in CFIT, and you can see it comes up 24 times. And at first it was kind of a scenario-based question, and he didn't really understand what I was getting at. And so I'm like, well, tell me what you know about CFIT. You know, and he's like, well, what's CFIT? And I'm like, okay, you know, I didn't want to just give away the answer, you know, so I'm trying to find different ways to ask the question. But I honestly don't remember if that applicant passed or failed that day. If that was the only thing, they may have still passed, just, you know. But we certainly talked about it in the debrief, and that is, you know, when you read the ACS, this comes up 24 times. So, and, you know, it is controlled flight into terrain is what it stands for. But, you know, does knowing that CFIT stands for controlled flight into terrain necessarily make someone a safer pilot? Well, it at least gave me a clue of how well that particular person studied the ACS, that's for sure. Definitely, you know, at best, it was awkward and embarrassing for him. So that's my quick advice on the value of the ACS and how to use it as a tool as the applicant. Certainly the flight instructor should do everything I'm saying as well, and really use this as a checklist to make sure that you have not missed anything with each of your Checkride applicants. So. Carl, any other points you think would be good to talk about on the ACS? Just kind of
inside of that appendix, one of the great things that it talks about is how the test is somewhat administered outside of following how the DPE scenario is going and unfolding. It says if you have an unsatisfactory on something, let's say in the flight portion, they have to tell you immediately, as soon as that's over. And so my best advice, especially when studying the ACS, is understanding that as you're going through it, if you're not hearing that was unsatisfactory, you're progressing, you're doing good, especially on the check ride. So if you read the sections in the appendix and stuff very carefully, you'll understand so much better what's actually going to happen, and you can relax a little bit.
Great point. So I just went to page A or Alpha 9, and here it talks about satisfactory performance, unsatisfactory performance. A lot of very important information here that the evaluator is required by policy to follow. So again, managing expectations, there shouldn't be any surprises here. And to your point there, Carl, it is maybe a little bit different on the ground versus the flight. So let me talk about it. I mean, technically, if someone is unsatisfactory on any task, that area of operation is unsatisfactory, and therefore the check ride is unsatisfactory. That is black and white in policy. That being said, the FAA gives us the ability to use our experience and our judgment to evaluate kind of the overall picture. And most of the DPs that I know and work with and have known over the years, the ground is more of an overall snapshot of the knowledge. And for example, when we're going through a scenario and the applicant says something wrong or backwards, I'll usually just discreetly make a note and kind of keep going and not give a lot of feedback. We're just kind of talking about their flight planning and scenario and everything related to it, and going through all the required items on the ACS checklist from the plan of action. And the few that I've had that were unsatisfactory on the ground, usually I had a growing list of what could be considered minor things, meaning any one of them, like that CFIT example, by itself, they're not going to fail a check ride just for that, in my opinion. Once he knew what it stood for, and we talked about, risk management and how to not run your airplane into the ground, he was fine on that. And that's the most important part of understanding CFIT, right? So, but once that list gets to a certain length, depending on what those things are, I basically let the applicant know. I usually start with a question. We're on the ground. It's been probably a couple hours at this point. It's probably been like pulling teeth to get good information out of them. And I usually ask them, how do you feel like this is going? And they usually know. They're like, it's not going well at all. And I hate breaking the bad news to them, but what I come back to is something I've shared here before, and that is the question of, does this person need more training? To meet the standards that are set by the FAA, does this person need more training? Because in that time, in that practical test, I am not allowed to be the one to give them that training. As much as I love teaching, when I've got my DP hat on, I'm not a flight instructor during that time. And until the test is over, I'm not allowed to teach. So if we're there and there's important things that are related to them knowing and understanding, it's very black and white. I need to let them know that that test is unsatisfactory. They go back to their instructor, they get more training. So the way to avoid that, which is what everyone would love to do, and trust me, I don't enjoy it any more than the applicant when they're struggling in the ground, is to understand these standards and know what's in the ACS and know what's expected, so there are no surprises. It really is an open book test as far as knowing what is allowed to be on the test. It's all right here. You just don't know exactly which of those elements the examiner is going to choose from. Okay, so that being said, Carl is right. The test is not officially unsatisfactory until the evaluator informs the applicant that it's unsatisfactory. And then we give a notice of disapproval, and that's the end of that check ride. In the flight, where we're doing maneuvers and things, it's much more black and white. And what Carl was talking about is a very good point to keep in mind, and that is, don't worry about whether you're passing or failing during the flight. The evaluator, DP, using myself as an example, is required to let you know that something is unsatisfactory before you move on to the next maneuver. Meaning, if you're doing private pilot steep turns and they're not satisfactory and the DP knows it, he or she is not allowed to have you go on and do slow flight or anything else until they let you know the check ride is unsatisfactory. They can't surprise you with that information later, later after a few maneuvers or later on the ground. They have to let you know right away. So what that means, and what Carl was saying, is if they have not told you during the flight that it's unsatisfactory, you are passing. And if the steep turns weren't that pretty, maybe they were the worst steep turns that you've done in a few weeks, but as soon as you're done with them, the evaluator says, okay, let's go on and do slow flight. Great. Forget about the steep turns. The DP is probably going to make a few notes. You're probably going to talk about it in the debrief, but apparently they were good enough. And the best thing you can do as the applicant is forget about it. What I always tell my clients is put it in the back seat, meaning put it behind you, forget about it. We'll take it off the back seat after the plane's tied down. That's when we can talk about it. And that's an important skill to learn as a pilot, is the ability to put something behind you and focus on what's happening now and in the future, because things don't always go the way we want. Sometimes things happen that are out of our control. Sometimes it was a mistake we made, but we still got an airplane to land or an approach to shoot or something like that. So the ability to put something in the back seat is really important. Now, once the DP tells you, I'm sorry, that was unsatisfactory, there are still some options. If the DP and the applicant agree, you may go on and do other maneuvers that have not yet been attempted, but the check ride is still unsatisfactory. And I've had to have that discussion a few times. And we always brief it before we go out to the airplane that may be an option. And I found that it really depends on the person's personality. Some people, I'd say most people, once they're unsatisfactory, their brain is fried. It probably wasn't a good day to start with. They didn't sleep well the night before, whatever is going on. It's better just to call it a day, go back, do a full stop, and have a list of things that were not attempted yet that will be evaluated on the next check ride. Other people, it's like a weight off their shoulders. They're like, well, I'm already unsatisfactory. It's not going to get any worse. Let's go do the other stuff. And they perform great.
Yep.
So it's kind of a personality thing. Go ahead.
Well, so the point I was going to make is, understanding that by reading this appendix inside of the ACS, you start picking up on these things. You start understanding, how it's going to work for you personally. And the more you know about that, the more relaxed you can be on your check ride. So that's personally why I just enjoy the ACS so much.
Yep.
Everyone should read it.
Absolutely. It's all right there. Good stuff. So I see that Sonia made it. Are you somewhere you can talk, Sonia? Did she say anything in the chat?
No.
Hi, I'm in the car.
She's on the road. Very good.
I'm considering this training for the multitasking for IFR unofficially.
There you go. There you go. Well, you feel free to mute out. Thank you for being here. Sonia is one of our medical professionals. She's a doctor and out there working on the front lines. So we appreciate everything you and your colleagues are doing in these times. So, but thank you for listening in at least. She actually emailed me some questions earlier, so we can go ahead and do those now that I know she's on board and at least can hear me thank her for that. So let me pull that up over here. And since she mentioned multitasking, I've got to get on my soapbox about that and mention that officially, I do use the term multitasking, so don't feel bad about that. But if you want to get technical about it, for humans, there really is no such thing as multitasking in the sense that you can work on more than one thing at a time. Now, it is true that there is our subconscious mind and our conscious mind, and we can train our subconscious to do certain things like drive the car so that we can consciously talk on the phone, hopefully using hands-free. And that can be referred to as multitasking, but I think it's better to call it switch tasking. And the reason I think that's important is it helps us realize that to do it well as a pilot, especially something like single pilot IFR, even VFR, but especially single pilot IFR, there's so much going on that it's important to realize you need to do the right thing at the right time for the right amount of time. and not get stuck on any one thing. And that's what I teach to my clients, is focus on doing the right thing at the right time for the right amount of time. Now, knowing what the right thing to do and when to do it and how long to do it, that takes training and experience. Switch tasking is a good way to think about it, because you're switching between the things that you're consciously doing. And a certain part of flying an airplane is teaching your subconscious mind to hold heading and altitude, or even to listen for your call sign on the radio. I mean, there is part of that we delegate to our subconscious mind. But the conscious mind, they've proven through studies, I think it was the Air Force did a lot of this back in like the 50s and 60s. There's a lot of well-documented studies that show we can really only focus on one thing at a time. So that being said, a little soapbox there. Let's look at what Sonia emailed me. And she had a couple good questions. She is studying to be an instrument pilot. And one of the questions that came up was the difference between a waypoint and a fix. And I will actually, let me go back here. See if I can find, I think I still had it open here. Yeah, the pilot controller glossary. Let me go ahead and share this. Okay, so first of all, a waypoint and a fix. Whether you're using VFR terminology or IFR terminology, the reality is they are used interchangeably, and you're really not going to be wrong to use them as synonyms. A waypoint, a fix, I know I use them interchangeably. When she first asked me the question, my assumption went to maybe related to RNAV, area navigation. The fact that fixes, I think, were the original, talking about a fix off of a VOR using DME or cross radials would maybe be the fix. And a waypoint was more like a GPS waypoint, because we don't talk about GPS fixes as much as we say waypoint. But all of that was just thinking of how I've heard it myself. When I did a search for it, I found a lot of similar conversation on the bulletin boards. Always be careful. Remember, when you're reading a forum or social media, you're really just looking at different pilots' opinions, and you got to be careful with that. So, right to the FAA, as a flight instructor and a DP, I always like to go to official sources. So this is just the pilot controller glossary. And the fix is a geographical position determined by visual reference to the surface, reference to one or more nav aids, celestial plotting. So you can even use like an old sextant, like they did many decades ago, looking at the stars, or by another navigational device. So it's just a geographical position that is determined some way, somehow, okay? Kind of broad, but there's the definition of a fix. Now we go down to waypoint. This is just alphabetical. And Wilco, one of my favorites. Carl knows that. One of the most misused and underused terms that we have. I love that one. How many words are there that have 5 letters that mean 3 sentences? You know what I mean? Okay, but I digress. Waypoint. A predetermined geographical position used for approach, definition, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it goes on. Bottom line, even when you read these, and basically Sonia already found this and she's like, yeah, I still don't get it. Understandable. I think the key word in some of the other opinions that I was reading when I spent a good 5 or 10 minutes searching around on this, the key is, the difference is the word predetermined. A fix is generally used, or traditionally might be a better word, traditionally used in the past. You talk about getting a fix on an aircraft's location. The fix is kind of like what's happening with the position of the airplane. It's a position of where am I right now, is kind of the implied use of the word fix, because you get a fix on something. The waypoint is something that's charted. All right, these are my own words, but this is how I think of it and what I think the differences that you find here. And when it says a predetermined geographical position, it means predetermined by the authority, like whoever put the chart together. But not just that. It's not just like the FAA says, here's a waypoint, we give it a 5-letter name, and now it's a waypoint. But we now have EFBs with GPS, like the iPad using ForeFlight, and we put in a user waypoint. That's still, once we create a user waypoint, whether it's on the G1000 or on the iPad or whatever, that is now a predetermined geographical position. So it wouldn't really be appropriate to call that a fix, though it kind of is. You know, if you look at the definition of fix, it's broad enough that you're not wrong to use it interchangeably. But that's the answer I came up with. There are 2 different definitions. If the FAA wanted them to be the same, they would. That being said, when I did a Google search, there are several FAA references that have fix/waypoint when they're describing one of these spots on a chart. So even the FAA often uses it interchangeably, saying it's basically the same thing, at least in the terms of what they're talking about in that particular document. All right. So that being said, she was asking another question, and thank you, Sonia, again, for sending the questions, about a flyover versus a flyby waypoint. Good, I still have that open. And this is something the pilots usually learn about when they're doing instrument training, but it doesn't hurt to get a head start for anyone that's working on sport or private. This is the Aeronautical Information Manual, section 1, let's see, what is it, 121 in the AIM, and figure number 122. So a flyby waypoint is what's the most common, and that is when you have to turn a corner using something like GPS is the most common. The GPS will actually calculate based on your ground speed and determine when to start making what's called a standard rate turn, which is 3 degrees per second. And you'll basically not fly over the waypoint. You'll fly by the waypoint. So here they call it alpha. Zoom in a little bit more here. And, you know, you're following this course. You start a nice 3 degree per second standard rate turn. And based on your ground speed, as long as you don't change your power significantly or fly it too steep or too shallow of a bank angle, you're going to be right on the course on your way to Bravo. There's other times where for some reason they want you to actually fly over the waypoint, and that's called a flyover waypoint. On an IFR chart, you see it with a circle around it, and that means that, and the box knows this, if you're doing a published procedure like a departure procedure or an approach procedure, and you've got that loaded in the panel mounted GPS of your airplane, then the box or the computer is going to fly you, in this case, to Alpha, and then it will sequence to Bravo. But that requires the pilot to do the same standard rate turn and come back and re-intercept the line. And it is exaggerated in this diagram a little bit. You know, this is not to scale, but you get the idea. So Sonia's question specifically was, make sure I get this right. Let's see, how far away from a flyby waypoint is it still acceptable to fly? All she found was, she did find some document from the FAA that talks about the radius of like the protected area if you're going 250 knots, which makes sense because that's the speed limit below 10,000 feet. So because that radius of turn is going to be determined by your ground speed, so that the max speed of 250 knots, if a jet hits this waypoint and starts a standard rate turn, how far away could they possibly hit a mountain or an obstacle? So that's a good reference, but she's really wondering if there's any other guidelines of how, basically how much leeway is there after you hit the flyover waypoint before you make your turn. I didn't find anything official other than the fact that the definition of a flyover waypoint is that as soon as you fly over it, make the turn. And using GPS, you'll see there's a very specific moment, an instant, when the HSI will sequence, or whatever you're using for your you'll see the waypoint switch in this example from Alpha to Bravo. At that exact moment, you're supposed to switch. I assume, Sonia, the reason you're asking the question is, well, what if I'm distracted? What if I'm switch tasking? I'm over here tuning the radios. I'm looking down at my iPad or, something like that. And I miss the switch from Alpha to Bravo. Is my Checkride failed? Am I in trouble? What's the leeway there? And the honest answer is it depends. It depends on the scenario. It depends on the situation. One of the things that I tell my applicants before we go out and do the flight is the good news is you don't have to be perfect. Okay. I think I've said this on here before. I usually hold my hand up like, perfect's way up here. Down here's a pilot that's not safe. You need to be safe. So not perfect, but safe. And that's the standard that is set here in what we talked about, the ACS. That leaves some room to not be perfect. When we're in the airplane, if it's something like this, or, usually the example I use is, okay, let's say I give you a VOR radial to track and you tune in the wrong frequency or you put in the wrong radial and it's just totally backwards. I'm not going to say anything, first of all. Just know that I'm a passenger. I'm not going to give any hints like your flight instructor used to. I'm just going to sit there and smile and act like everything's fine because passengers don't know that you're doing something wrong. And I'm going to watch you start going the wrong way. The tolerances oftentimes are set by the ACS. As long as you stay within those tolerances, we're okay. Meaning you need to catch the mistake yourself and fix it yourself. As the DP, as long as I see, and I'm going to know why you missed it, okay? Trust me, I'm going to see, and going back to this example from Alpha to Bravo, I'm going to see when it auto-sequenced. I'm going to see that you didn't make the turn right away. I'm going to see that we're still just plowing straight ahead when we should have turned. And I'm going to be watching the seconds tick by. If it's just a few seconds and you catch it like, oh crap, and you turn, we're probably okay. Something else I keep in mind is I imagine I'm an observer of this, especially for an instrument check ride. I imagine myself being an observer from the point of view of someone looking at a radar scope. I'm the approach controller looking at my radar scope. I see your altitude and I see your track. This doesn't work for everything, but for en route operations, at least, I think, you know what? If I'm not concerned looking at the radar scope, you're probably okay. If the person looking at the radar scope, the controller is concerned because you're not doing what you were cleared to do, now we've got a problem. That being said, I should probably go back. I am still sharing my screen. Let's go to.
Well, Joe had a quick question about that before we move on.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yep, we hear you.
Basically, I was wondering what your opinion is on if someone does not have a GPS and say we're tracking to a VOR and we're going to do a procedure turn when we reach the VOR. There's two different scenarios. One, you have DME capability and one you don't. Assuming you have DME capability, do you have problems with students turning maybe a half a mile before they get to the VOR to intercept the outbound procedure turn radial, so they're not going past it and then coming back to it? I would assume you would expect them to fly to it and get the from indication if they don't have DME, but as long as they have that, I've been teaching them to go ahead and lead it out by a half a mile or so.
So you're basically saying, let's just use the same graphic. Let's pretend this is a VOR. We don't have fancy GPS. Maybe we've got DME, the old school DME. And you're basically saying, hey, what if we give ourselves a fly-by waypoint? Right. Because we know we want to do this turn and end up on this radial outbound. I would not have any problem with that. Again, imagining myself looking at a radar scope, they're within the tolerances, especially for a VOR because of the cone of confusion. There really is no positive navigation once you get right over the top of the VOR. So my answer is it's perfectly acceptable to use experience and situational awareness to cut the corner a little bit. Now, if they start too far back and they cut this corner and they end up over here somewhere with more than 3/4 scale deflection, now we've got a problem. I'm talking about after they're away from the cone of confusion. But as a technique, I think that is perfectly acceptable. Good question.
I have a question that kind of goes into that. If you're flying an instrument approach, wouldn't you need to have something more than just a VOR? I'm just starting myself, so I'm not sure, but don't you need something?
Pico, am I saying your name right?
Yep, Pico, perfect.
Very
Pico,
good. Glad you're here. So great question. The reality is that these days there are only a few approaches that you can fly with only a VOR in your airplane. Usually you need some kind of distance measuring equipment. And of course, most airplanes that you're going to do for flight training will have GPS of some kind. So you see a lot more approaches that are GPS these days. But there are approaches where, I mean, certainly when I did my training back in early 90s, 93, 94, I guess it was, we were still doing NDB approaches. Joe, were you flying back then?
Yeah, I was doing NDB approaches too.
So, you know, imagine you've got an airport over here. Again, I'm using this graphic for something it wasn't intended, but this might be an NDB. And no matter which direction you came from, the procedure was go to the NDB, fly out a certain amount of time, turn around, come back on a certain course to the NDB, and then come into the airport. And, you know, the old joke was all you had was a watch and a compass. And it kind of seemed that way, where you would use time and estimated ground speed. And I'm telling you, you kids these days don't know how good you have it with GPS. So I remember when I saw the first GPS receiver, it was a handheld and about the size of a big graphing calculator, no moving map. All it was is a text output. It was like 4 lines of monochrome text output on this big, huge device. But I remember being so amazed, like, what? It listens to satellites and it knows where it is? This is amazing. And it had a database where you could put in an airport. I think that first one, you couldn't even put in maybe VORs, probably VORs and airports. And it would tell you not only if you're going the right way, but it would tell you how soon or what time you'll be there. Like, wow, it's like an E6B that's automatic. It's like, so anyway, nice little trip down memory lane. But yeah, we've come a long way since the mid 90s. So I think that was a tangent. What were we talking about there? Oh, I was going to talk about tolerances real quick. So not that tangents are bad. I appreciate the discussion. So if you just go to the instrument ACS, I'm going to do a search for the word scale. And right out of the gate, yeah, I don't know if I was at the beginning. Yeah, I guess that's the first one. You can see the reference here, and most of them are going to be 3/4 scale deflection. So I mentioned that earlier. I just wanted to show you where that came from. And if you scroll through the 10 different things here, you'll see, you know, holding procedures, 10 different tasks, intercepting, tracking, navigation systems, and arcs. You know, you'll see that reference for the instrument. It's different for ATP, but talking about how close do you have to be to a certain radial. So going back to Sonia's question about flyover waypoint, okay, you missed it by a few seconds. You know, you could use the same question with you're entering a hold and you missed the turn, or you're supposed to intercept the inbound course, or, you know, whatever it is, you missed the indication on the panel that it was time to do something. You kept going the direction you were going without doing the turn. Is that okay? And the answer is it depends how you deal with it. You know, how far off course you go, all those kinds of things. Now, that being said, let me give you something else that could be considered a get out of jail free card. I probably shouldn't call it that because it's not. Okay, you're not getting away with something. I'm going to go and stop the share here. But that is on an instrument check ride. Well, on any check ride, the advice I give people is treat it like real life. On an instrument check ride, in real life, both, remember that air traffic control is a tool in your toolbox. Part of good single pilot resource management is knowing how to use air traffic control. And keep in mind, this isn't an absolute, okay? It's going to depend on the overall situation, but let me give one example. If I had an applicant for an instrument check ride that we went through the ground, everything was rock solid, we go out and do the flight, everything's looking good. This person is obviously well prepared for the check ride, okay? They're well prepared to be an instrument pilot. And as we go into the first hold, you know, getting ready for the first approach, they do something knucklehead, like like they just turn the wrong way, or, you know, something that's obviously a brain spasm, you know, they just messed up. But within a couple seconds, they realize they messed up, and they simulate a radio call to me, because usually here in Phoenix, I'm simulating that I'm air traffic control. And they say, Albuquerque Center, this is Cessna 12345. I'm sorry, but I just totally screwed up that hold entry. Request vectors back for another approach. I would be fine with that. I would play their game. You know, I would go along with the scenario. I shouldn't call it playing the game. I would go along with the scenario. I would give them a heading, and I would allow them to come back. Now, is that giving them another chance to do something that was failed? Again, it depends. Okay, don't read too much into this. It depends on the overall situation. But based on the information that I just made up fictitiously, I would tell you, again, everything else is rock solid. They made a mistake. They realized they made a mistake. They asked for a vector. What I'm going to be looking at is the evaluator is, overall, do they need more training is a question that I always ask. And did they do anything unsafe? Did they show a lack of knowledge? Did they show a lack of understanding or risk management, anything like that? In the scenario I gave, I'm thinking, you know what, they're probably okay. They realized they made a mistake. They asked for help from ATC. They came back. They did it correctly. The rest of the flight went fine. I'm going to be okay with that. And I think most DPs, most FAA evaluators, everybody would be okay with that. Again, it's not that you're allowed to mess up and get a redo. Got to be very clear on that. There's no room for that. But it's more like, you know what, I wasn't quite ready for this. I'm going to ask for a vector. Let's try it again. Will that work for you if you mess up? I don't know. I'm just telling you my overall advice there. Again, keep it real. If something's happening in the check ride, whether it's a scenario given to you by the evaluator, or whether it's something that you should have done and didn't, or did do and shouldn't have, just ask yourself that important question. What would I do in real life right now? And just do that. And if that involves a simulated radio call to ATC, do that. That's the best advice I can give you for dealing with things not going quite perfectly in a check ride. Because remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be within the standards. So, Joe, you got quite a bit of experience helping people get through check rides. Does that jive with the DPs and you see in your area?
The way I look at it is it's real life stuff. If you mess up in real life, you have to do something about it. You're not just going to sit there. And I tell people if they get in a situation like that to do what they would do in real life. And the evaluator, the DPE's got to test you on your ability or of task management and aeronautical decision making and things like that too. And if you're realizing there's a problem and you're fixing that problem the way you should fix the problem, and it's not causing a hazard anywhere, then then it should be fine. But if you keep doing that, if you keep doing missed approaches every time you mess something up, or you're constantly asking for, vectors again because you messed them up, that's obviously a lack of skill. But, a one-time thing, I don't think is a big deal.
Very good. And bringing an example for private or commercial students, doing a go-around from a landing. And, go around is something we need to see. It's part of the check ride. So if you don't choose to go around, the evaluator is probably going to ask or give you a scenario that requires you to go around. But if you're coming in on that shorter soft field landing and things just don't feel right, don't look right, go around. Like Joe's saying, if it's been 3 or 4 times, it's like, okay, I do need to see that you can make this airplane do what you need to make it do. But certainly once or even twice, especially if there's gusty conditions, the wind's shifting around, things are catching you by surprise, and I think most DPs like myself, we understand you're nervous. Nobody likes to be tested. And I'm not going to say I cut people slack for that because, at the same time, after you earn your certificate, you're probably going to be nervous the first time you take your loved ones flying. There's going to be some nerves with that, and you need to be able to perform, obviously. First time you fly instruments in the clouds, you're going to be nervous. You still got to perform. So performing under pressure is kind of part of the test, part of what you're being evaluated on. That being said, we understand check ride jitters, and if you choose to go around, that's your choice. Our local FAA did just get clarification on the commercial power off 180. And the FAA did clarify that, what I say, I think it's AFS 640, if I got that right, the testing in Oklahoma City. They clarified that the intent of the power off 180 on the commercial is to hit your spot the first time and not to do go arounds, because we had some disagreement among DPs of whether it was okay for someone to do a go around when they're officially doing the power off 180 on the commercial. And the FAA basically came back and said, you need to, by that level, at the commercial pilot level, you need to be able to nail your spot. That being said, there's still room for environmental factors, and the DP knows, if there's a traffic conflict or a big downdraft or updraft or something that was out of the applicant's control, then the DPE may say, hey, let's do a go around or simulate a fuel truck on the runway or, airplane on the runway or something like that. They can change the scenario. But if it's just a plain Jane power off 180, they really should hit it the first time without doing a go around. So, but certainly a normal landing, short field, soft field, if you feel like you need to go around, that's part of the judgment that we're assessing. So good discussion, guys. Carl, anything come in the chat?
Nope, we're good. Oh, wait, we just did.
All right. While you're looking at that, I'm going to double check, make sure I didn't miss anything for Sonia.
Sorry, last minute entry.
No,
Actually, I have another comment too. I don't know if this kind of pertains to the question about waypoints. I've just pulled out a sectional for Seattle, and there's a section on the chart itself that says Seattle VFR waypoints, and it makes it a little more confusing, I think, because there are VFR waypoints, there are instrument flight rules waypoints, there are visual checkpoints, and it's like, okay, which is which? I know that the flags are the visual checkpoints, I think, unless that's, because it doesn't have a VP in front of it, right? The visual checkpoints have the VP and 3 letters after it. They're not supposed to be pronounceable, whereas some of the waypoints, usually I think they're waypoints, right? You
say you're looking at the chart legend?
I'm looking at, it's not in the legend, it's in an inset for Portland.
Okay, let's just pull it up here on SkyVector. And you guys should be seeing that. Portland, I haven't been there for a while. What's the 3-letter?
Papa Delta X-ray.
That sounds familiar. And move you guys out of the way here. So this is World VFR. I know there's a way.
I think it usually says chart. Yeah, there you go.
So I just had to zoom in and go to Seattle. All right, is that the one you're looking at? No, you said Portland inset. Here we go.
There it is, right there. You got it. Right below that.
Okay. So again, the actual words in conversation or even in a testing scenario are probably going to be interchangeable. But what we found in the pilot controller glossary was basically saying that the waypoint is the predefined. That's the word that I'm focusing on. That's not in the definition of a fix. So certainly anything on a chart, I would consider a waypoint. Is it also a fix? Yeah, it's a broad definition, but we usually just call them waypoints. So yeah, VP is, I always assumed that stood for visual point, visual reporting point, okay. Let's see what they say. So,
and actually, if you scroll down a little bit or bring the map into view, sorry, drag the map down.
Over here? Yeah,
so now right where the convention center is, right below the word Portland in the outer ring, there's a word, it says mules. What are we defining that as?
All right, let me catch up with you because I don't know the convention center. So can you see my cursor?
Yep, it's
Where do I
south
need to go?
It's south of there, but it was still in the inset. You have to probably go back to that. Yeah.
All right.
Wherever that was.
So right in here, looking for.
No, that.
Or do I need to go to the inset? You're saying?
Yeah, the inset that you had open before.
I did that on World VFR, I think. Nope. thought it was in here.
Are you talking about the inset on the side of the?
Oh,
The
the
map.
inset over
Up the
here.
side of the chart.
This is
There
the
it is.
inset.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, that's what goes in that box. Okay.
Yep. So
I'm
right
with you.
below, so it's directly south of the airport, there's convention center with a waypoint flag, and below that,
Mules.
yes, that mules.
All right. So
It's not
again,
fixed.
some of this just comes from habit, I'm sure, the way I was brought up. I refer to that as an intersection. So there's a new word for you that we haven't even been using. So it is a waypoint, it is a fix, it is an intersection. The reason I call that an intersection is because it's probably the most specific term to use for what mules really is, which is the intersection of two different VOR radials, specifically of a does Victor 182 keep going? I wonder. The radial at least does. So whatever Victor 182 is, at the intersection of Victor 182 and Victor 448 is mule's intersection. So you could say that that fix, that waypoint, is located at the intersection of those two radials off of two different VORs. Whereas something like Lake Oswego, Oswego,
yeah.
has a flag on it, which means it's an ATC reporting point. Am I using the right terminology? Visual checkpoint, parentheses, visual reporting points are portrayed with the checkpoint flag. So you can call it a visual checkpoint, you can call it a VFR reporting point, you can call it a visual reporting point, doesn't really matter. The point is it has a name, and that means it goes both ways. It means that you can expect ATC to know where it is, and they can expect you to know where it is. So when you're flying somewhere unfamiliar, part of doing your homework is looking at all the flags around the airports you plan to go to and be prepared to know when they tell you, report that. Now, in real life, if you miss one and they say report Lake Oswego, I don't know if you're supposed to say that with an accent or not. Not that I have one. You could say unfamiliar, totally acceptable, and they're going to be fine with that. They'll tell you to report 10 miles southwest, whatever. So it's okay to say unfamiliar. Always remember that that's a tool in your toolbox. But if you are familiar, it's a point you can both use. Something relatively new is the VP waypoint. That's what's talked about here in this this first paragraph is what I meant to say. Let me read what it says real quick. So, standalone VFR waypoints portrayed using the same form currently used for instrument flight waypoints. Okay, fantastic. They're not really instrument. They're just making a comparison there. So, do you guys have any around Portland or Seattle? There's got to be some here. I'm looking for a VP. If I don't see anything quick, I'll go to Phoenix because we have them all over the place.
It's one of those four-pointed stars that would make it stand out, right?
Yeah, so why am I not seeing a single one around here? All right, we're going to Phoenix. So I can just put in PXR. All right, so I don't remember how many years ago they started doing this, but here in the Phoenix area, it was mainly the same points that we had the flags for many years. Go to the Phoenix TAC. They went to a lot of those same points and they added in the VP designation. So here's Ahwatukee Golf Course. That's a stranger word that I do know how to pronounce because I grew up here. So this flag right here identifies a very specific point that has been there for many, many decades. And it's always been Ahwatukee Golf Course. But in recent history, they added VPAWG. And it was sometime after GPS became mainstream, because now what you can do is plug that into your GPS, or you can put it in ForeFlight and as a waypoint in a flight plan. And it makes it really easy to put it into something like that, like GPS. So that's nice. You can see Arizona Mills has one. They're all over the place. So a lot of the flags that we have, some do, some don't. Over here, Scottsdale College does not, but the Country Club and Canal does. And usually the letters have something to do with the initials of the point, but they all start with VP, Victor Papa. So it's not an IFR waypoint, but it is a visual waypoint that you can put into GPS, and it's usually, at least in my experience, associated with one of these flags that means something different, we already talked about, which is ATC function. So does that help clear that up at least a little bit? So, did we even answer the question in Portland?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It's just, like you said, it's confusing.
Yeah. Different functions, whether you're talking about putting it in a computer or whether you're talking about talking to ATC, but a lot of times they're related or overlap, maybe a way to think about it. So
yeah, and pointing out that it's really an intersection. I didn't realize that most of the ones that I had been seeing are actually where they cross, not just like in the middle of nowhere.
You know, for pilots like Joe and I that have been around for a while, it's probably almost humorous, because to us, it doesn't seem that long ago that all we had was intersections because we both started flying before GPS was a thing for airplanes. So in our mind, we had intersections first using cross radials. And if we paid extra money, we could rent an airplane from the flight school that actually had this amazing capability called DME, which was like, wow, back in the mid 90s. You mean you can tell how far you are from something? That's awesome. You know, okay, I'm being a little bit facetious, but it really doesn't seem that long ago to us. And then GPS came along and we started adding all these cool things like we were just talking about. So yeah, usually on a chart, if you see something like Carlo there, it was 2 intersecting VOR radials, and that's all we used to have. Here's one over here, Mingi. You don't see the other radial, but the fact that you have these 2 arrows here tells you it is an intersection. And if you go to the IFR chart, they actually will have a triangle there. So here it's a waypoint, it's a fix. And it's also an intersection of intersecting radials from a VOR. So a lot of terms that can be used interchangeably for sure. So good discussion though. I appreciate that. Anything new come in, Carl, or are we about ready to call it a day?
I think that we need to call it a day. It's about 1 hour.
Very good. Well, thank you again, those of you who made it on live. I appreciate it. Kind of a smaller group today, but that's okay. We still had a great discussion. And Carl, thank you again for helping to host and watch the questions. Joe, appreciate your input as always. And with that, I think we're on Saturday. That one's open for registration, so go check that out at my website, FlywithJim.com. And if you just go over the resources menu, I was trying to remember where it's at. If you go under resources, you'll see Stump the DPE. And yeah, we'll keep going as long as this shelter in place thing keeps going, and appreciate you guys' participation. So with that, have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thanks for doing this.